So today, I want to talk about something that happened 24 hours ago that confirms everything I have been telling you about the real power structure emerging in this war. And what I am about to show you is not speculation. This is documented fact. China just signed a comprehensive strategic agreement with Iran guaranteeing 10 years of energy purchases regardless of what happens with the Strait of Hormuz. And in doing so, China just proved something I said weeks ago that most people thought was impossible. Iran will never give up control of Hormuz. Not in 6 months. Not in 5 years. Not in 10 years. Because China just guaranteed that Iran does not have to. Let me explain exactly what happened and why this changes everything. 24 hours ago, China and Iran finalized the details of what they are calling an energy security partnership. The core of this agreement is very simple, but absolutely devastating to American strategy. China commits to purchasing a minimum of 1.2 million barrels of Iranian oil per day for the next 10 years. Guaranteed, regardless of sanctions, regardless of the security situation in the Gulf, regardless of whether the Strait of Hormuz is open or closed, China will buy Iranian oil. And China will pay in yuan, not dollars. Now let me walk you through why this is so significant. Because on the surface, people might think this is just a trade deal. China needs oil. Iran sells oil. What is the big deal? But what this actually represents is China giving Iran the one thing that was supposed to force Iran to negotiate: economic pressure. The entire American strategy for ending this war has been built on the assumption that Iran would eventually run out of money, that sanctions would cripple the Iranian economy, that Iran would be unable to sell its oil, and that economic desperation would force Iran to the negotiating table. China just destroyed that strategy completely. Iran now has a guaranteed buyer for its oil for the next decade. Iran has guaranteed revenue in a currency that bypasses Western financial systems. Iran can sustain its economy indefinitely regardless of what America does militarily. And this means Iran has absolutely no incentive to give up control of the Strait of Hormuz. Why would Iran reopen the strait when closing it gives Iran maximum strategic leverage and China has guaranteed Iran's economic survival anyway? Let me explain the mathematics of this because the numbers are staggering. 1.2 million barrels per day. At current oil prices, let us say approximately $85 per barrel equals roughly $100 million per day. That is $36 billion per year in guaranteed revenue for Iran. For context, Iran's entire annual government budget before this war was approximately $100 billion. So China is essentially guaranteeing Iran over 1/3 of its entire government revenue for the next 10 years. This is not a trade deal. This is a strategic subsidy designed to ensure Iran can fight indefinitely. And the payment mechanism is crucial. China is not paying in dollars that Iran would have to convert through Western banks. China is paying in yuan deposited directly into Iranian accounts in Chinese banks. Iran can then use those yuan to buy Chinese goods, Chinese technology, Chinese weapons, Chinese construction services, Chinese everything. China has created a closed-loop economic system where Iran is completely insulated from Western financial pressure. Now let me talk about what this means for the Strait of Hormuz specifically. I said weeks ago that Iran would never voluntarily give up control of Hormuz. And people ask me, how can you be so sure? What if America increases military pressure? What if sanctions devastate the Iranian economy? What if Iran is forced to negotiate? And my answer was always the same. Iran will not be forced to negotiate because Iran's strategic position is too strong and because China will not allow Iran to collapse. And now China has made that guarantee explicit. China has publicly committed to supporting Iran economically for a decade. This tells Iran, and more importantly, this tells America, that economic pressure will not work. Iran can keep Hormuz closed indefinitely because Iran's economy is now underwritten by China. And China benefits enormously from Hormuz remaining closed because every day the strait stays closed, oil prices stay elevated, American allies suffer, the petrodollar weakens, and China's strategic position strengthens. Think about what this means from Iran's perspective. Iran looks at this deal and sees complete strategic freedom. Iran does not need to worry about oil revenue. Iran does not need to worry about sanctions. Iran does not need to reopen Hormuz to restore its economy. Iran can focus entirely on its strategic objectives, which are maintaining control of the strait, expanding influence across the Middle East, and forcing America to accept Iran as a regional power. And China just gave Iran the resources to pursue those objectives for a decade. Now let me talk about the timing. Why did China announce this now? Why 24 hours ago? Because China is sending a message. not just to Iran, to America. The message is this: you cannot win this war through economic pressure. You cannot starve Iran into submission. You cannot wait for Iran's economy to collapse. China will not allow it. So if America wants to end this conflict, America will have to either accept Iran's terms or escalate militarily to a level that is politically and economically unsustainable. This is strategic signaling at its finest. China is telling America that the options are narrowing: negotiation on Iran's terms or endless costly war. There is no third option where economic sanctions force Iran to capitulate. China just removed that option from the table. And there is another layer to this. By guaranteeing Iranian oil purchases for 10 years, China is also guaranteeing its own energy security independent of the Gulf Arab states and independent of the Strait of Hormuz. Think about the geography. Iranian oil can be shipped to China through the Persian Gulf and then through the Strait of Malacca. But if Hormuz closes, Iran can also export oil overland through pipelines to Central Asia and from there to China. China has been building this infrastructure for years, specifically for scenarios like this. So China is not dependent on Hormuz being open. China gets Iranian oil either way. But Japan, South Korea, India, Europe, they are all dependent on Hormuz being open because their oil comes from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, all of which are on the wrong side of the strait. Do you see what China has done? China has positioned itself to benefit from Hormuz being closed while its economic competitors suffer. This is not just a trade deal. This is economic warfare disguised as commerce. Now let me connect this to the bigger picture I have been laying out in previous videos. China is systematically building an alternative global economic system that does not depend on American approval, American currency, or American military protection. The yuan-based oil trade with Russia, the yuan-based oil trade with Iran, the yuan-based oil trade with Saudi Arabia, the Belt and Road infrastructure creating overland trade routes that bypass maritime choke points, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization creating security frameworks independent of American alliances. All of this is designed to create a parallel world where China and its partners can operate completely outside American influence. And the Iran energy deal is one of the most important pieces of this puzzle because it demonstrates that even nations under maximum American pressure, even nations at war with American forces, can survive and thrive if they align with China. This is the lesson every nation watching this conflict is learning right now. American sanctions are no longer a death sentence if China is willing to provide an alternative. American military pressure is no longer decisive if China is willing to provide economic support. American dominance is no longer inevitable if China is willing to build parallel systems. And China is absolutely willing to do all of these things because every dollar China spends supporting Iran is a dollar that weakens American global primacy. Let me also talk about what this means for the petrodollar specifically. Remember what I explained before. The petrodollar system depends on oil being priced in dollars, but China is now buying 1.2 million barrels per day of Iranian oil in yuan. Russia is selling oil to China in yuan. Saudi Arabia is beginning to accept yuan for some transactions. The volume of oil being traded outside the dollar system is growing every month. And as that volume grows, the structural demand for dollars declines. This is a slow-motion collapse of the petrodollar, not a sudden crash. A gradual erosion where more and more energy trade happens in currencies other than the dollar. And every barrel of oil sold in yuan instead of dollars is one less reason for central banks to hold dollars, one less source of demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, one less pillar supporting America's ability to borrow $39 trillion. China understands this perfectly. China is not trying to destroy the dollar overnight. China is trying to create a slow, irreversible shift where the dollar becomes one currency among several rather than the dominant global currency. And energy trade is the key battleground because energy is the one commodity every nation absolutely needs. Control energy pricing and you control the global monetary system. Now let me address what I know some people are thinking. Is China not taking a huge risk by tying itself to Iran for 10 years? What if Iran collapses? What if the Iranian government falls? What if America somehow wins this war decisively? These are valid questions. And the answer tells you everything about how confident China is in its strategic assessment. China does not think Iran is going to collapse. China does not think America can win this war decisively. China has looked at the same strategic realities I have been explaining to you and concluded that Iran is in a stronger position than America. Iran controls Hormuz. Iran has home field advantage. Iran can sustain casualties and economic pain that American democracy cannot tolerate. Iran is fighting for survival while America is fighting for primacy. And historically, nations fighting for survival are far more resilient than nations fighting for dominance. So, from China's perspective, this is not a risky bet. This is a strategic certainty. Iran will survive this conflict. The strait will remain contested indefinitely, and China will have secured a decade of guaranteed energy supply while simultaneously weakening American global power. This is what great power competition actually looks like. Not dramatic military confrontations, quiet strategic moves that accumulate over time and shift the fundamental balance of power. Subscribe for more analysis on how China is reshaping the global order and what it means for your economic future explained clearly. And tell me in the comments, do you think China's 10-year commitment to Iran just made this war unwinnable for America? I will see you next time. Let me leave you with one final thought. I have been saying for weeks that Iran will never give up Hormuz voluntarily. And people kept asking me how I could be so certain. Now you know, because China just guaranteed that Iran never has to. This war is not ending on American terms. It is ending on terms dictated by geography, economics, and the emergence of a new global power structure that does not revolve around Washington. That is the reality. And the sooner American policymakers accept it, the less painful the adjustment will be.